There's a few cases that stick in your mind, and that's usually because of the really emotive and difficult challenges of those cases. The gang had used them to gain access to the depository, very sophisticated disguises as police officers. They had stolen over £52 million. Our role is there to investigate, our role is to gather the evidence, present it to the courts. Our role was to look after that family. There were 3 people who were in fear of their lives, and they honestly believed they were going to be killed.
From police constable to chief constable, what has been your most challenging moment in your career?
We deal with death a lot, but it's not too often we deal with multiple deaths, and particularly the way these poor people had died. It took us across the globe. The level of emotion and trauma on the team and on me was really, really high. My key message to anybody from any community: do not for a second think you cannot be a police officer, because you can. Are you someone that is selfless? You'll think about other people first, that you enjoy helping other people, that you like protecting other people. There are hundreds and hundreds of different jobs within one employer. To anyone with those values, if you are even thinking about it, give it a go, because it can take you to places that personally and professionally you just get such massive rewards from it. It's a truly wonderful job.
Welcome to More Than the Badge, a Kent Police podcast. My name is Vinny Waggioni, a Detective Inspector at Kent Police. I'll be your host today, and today's guest is Chief Constable Tim Smith. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thanks, Vinny. Lovely to be here.
What inspired you to become a police officer?
That was nearly 33 years ago now, Vinny. So you kind of latch on to, can I even remember that, I suppose, is the first thing to say. Well, I can. And I was at a point where I'd done quite a lot of academic study, and I was due to go to university and do something in sciences. But I'd spent probably a year or two kind of thinking, do I want to do that, or do I want to have a career? And one of my uncles was a police officer. He did 30 years in Avon and Somerset, and he got chatting to me, and he clearly recognised that some of the qualities I had would have fitted the police service, and he mentioned it to me, and I just thought on it more. I took a little bit more advice, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought it did fit me really quite well. So in all honesty, it was actually quite a practical decision at the start of it. I hadn't spent the whole of my life wanting to be a police officer, which some of my colleagues, do, and that's absolutely fine. But once I'd started, and once I'd joined and started to understand the work, and I realised that, the qualities that I had would fit well for public service, and I just enjoyed it more and more that I did it. And so the motivations continued from there, really. But actually, starting was just a practical decision, really, about I wanted a career, and I wanted something that offered me stability and offered me the potential to do different things. And so I went for it.
It's a good segue into the next question, which is, how has it evolved over the 30 plus years?
Well, that's a huge question. I could probably spend an hour just talking about the differences, but we haven't got that long. So I think the things that are different today, I would say the level of expectation on police officers is very different to when I joined. Police officers are really in the public eye in a way today that I never was when I joined. Their CCTV systems were kind of just starting, really. There was certainly no mobile phones with camera capability. Their dash cams weren't a thing. And I think the media attention on policing has grown and grown over the years as well. So I think there's a lot more expectation on cops today. And I think rightly the public are far better informed than they were when I joined. And they're rightly far more vocal as well about the service they should expect, about trust and confidence, about how we deal with things like violence against women and girls, how we respond internally to the challenge of misogyny, how we make sure we're doing everything with honesty and integrity. Those have always been there, but they're very, very, very public now, and the public rightly are asking us about them. So I think the expectation's very different today than it was when I joined.
Are you able to share some of the sort of key responsibilities you have now as the Chief Constable of Kent?
Yeah, I mean, it can be summarised fairly quickly in I am simply the person with the ultimate responsibility for the policing service we deliver. So it doesn't really matter whether that is frontline policing, whether it's our neighbourhood policing, our investigations, our dealing with serious and organised crime, or how we respond to our border security. All of that ultimately sits under me. So it is in some ways akin to a chief executive role in other organisations, but obviously very different because I'm a public servant. We're an apolitical organisation. We don't get involved in the politics of it. We police without fear or favour. But that's ultimately the role, and that responsibility comes with some very specific things about authorising certain activity. So some of the most sensitive tactics we use in policing have to be authorised by me. As an organisation, I'm responsible for all of the people and all of the budget. And how do I make sure that that budget stretches in the right way? How do I make sure that the right teams have the right level of resource to deal with the demands that they face? And ultimately, I'm accountable to the Police and Crime Commissioner and the public for the service we deliver.
And I know you must have gone through and had dealt with sort of many jobs, but I believe you were the SIO on the Securitas investigation.
So in about 2005, I think I was promoted to the Detective Chief Inspector in charge of our serious and organised crime team. So they are the team that are really charged with catching the most serious criminals, the most organised criminals in the county. One night I got a call in the early hours of the morning. I was actually the force's senior detective on call as well, which was probably a useful coincidence because of the role I held in my day job. And I remember talking to the inspector who said, look, there's been some sort of robbery. And I remember saying, well, what is it? And he said, I think there's been an armed robbery at a cash depository. So I said, well, what's a cash depository? I don't even, what do you mean? And long story short, there had been a really awful offence, kidnapping of the bank depository, cash depository manager and his family. And then the gang had used them to gain access to the depository. Very sophisticated disguises as police officers. A real lot of thought had clearly gone into the planning and preparation, and they had got into the depository. They had stolen an awful lot of money, over £52 million, made it and still makes it the largest cash robbery in the world in peacetime. I think people say that the Central Bank of Iraq, when it was sacked during the first Gulf War, lost 80 million in cash, but that was during a war. So in peacetime, there's never been a cash robbery of that size. So that was really challenging from the focus that brings on from government, from the public. But ultimately, it was just another investigation. And I was supported by some amazing staff. I spent about 8 months working on it. I was responsible for all of the decisions about our covert deployments. So I had very little sleep. I had very few days off. And I was really tired at the end of it. But we caught everybody that was in that cash depository, probably with the exception of one person who we're still after.
Still after?
Yeah, so we've got several lines of inquiry that are still active, and they relate to one suspect that we're still doing some work on. And there was a number of lines of inquiry to try and trace the money, and I think probably about half the money was recovered, but half remained outstanding. So a truly remarkable job. A lot of people went to prison for a long time, rightly, for their part in this crime. And as I'd always say to the team, you have to focus on what our role is. Our role is there to investigate. Our role is to gather the evidence, present it to the courts. Our role is to look after that family. And interestingly, the media attention was very much on the robbery element and the cash. But we worked hard to remind the media that actually in this, there were 3 people who were in fear of their lives. one of whom was a child. And they honestly believed they were going to be killed. And they were threatened with firearms, they were threatened with their lives. And that was over a very prolonged period of time whilst the robbery took place. And they were tied up, cable tied up with a load of other individuals who were working at the cash depository and left there. So, it was a really awful case in terms of the impact on people, not just that it was such a huge cash robbery.
And, you've had 30 years plus of policing. What continues to motivate you to stay in the service?
Yeah, it's a good question, because the pension arrangements for us are changing, as you'll know. So I could have retired at 30 years and probably been very happy with my career and what I'd achieved, but I knew that there was more in me, and I have always truly hated people that commit crime and hurt other people. I understand that someone who is starving, I can forgive them stealing bread. I've struggled to forgive people that really cause huge harm to others, particularly children. I find that always very, very difficult. And I don't investigate those sorts of offences anymore. I don't do the work to try and prevent those directly, but I realise to have the opportunity to lead the organisation that does that, it means that I can try and make sure that the service we deliver to the public is the very, very best it can be, delivered with absolute integrity, so that I can at least retire knowing that I did my very, very best to make the organisation the most effective police service it can. And I know I will never be able to stop all crime. I do get that. But I'm pretty determined that this period in my career is the period that I can exert the most influence to try and get the force as the very best sort of crime fighting force I can.
And I know as I go through the journey of progression within the organisation, I see a lot more responsibility being added onto myself. Yeah. And seeing your position as Chief Constable and the amount of responsibility you have for the organisation, how do you balance a healthy work-life harmony?
Well, it's always, I mean, everybody does it differently. I think probably when I joined it was lots of beer and talking to your mates. I probably wouldn't advocate lots of beer now, because that wouldn't be healthy living. But I think talking to people, having that ability to speak to friends and family, having the ability internally to talk to peers and colleagues. We're part of a team as chiefs. There's lots of us out there, so chiefs will talk to each other, and that's quite helpful. But I've got a really strong chief officer team around me, and of course we have a rank structure, but it doesn't mean that I can't go to one of our assistant chief constables or one of the other senior leaders and say, look, well, I've got this problem, what do you think? And get their advice and their support. And policing is a team game, there's no doubt in my mind about it. If you want to be really, really effective, you need to work with other people and work well with other people. Even sometimes maybe if you don't have an immediate personal connection with that individual, you've got to be professional. So that support internally is there, and then externally, I've got friends from different walks of life, and there's only so much I could share with them about my day sometimes, but it's quite handy to have people to bounce things off and just say, look, what, have you ever confronted this sort of issue? And colleagues in other walks of life that maybe have similar responsibilities, though not quite the same. It's quite useful to have that as well. And experience helps you too, Vinny. You don't do 30 plus years and not have the ability to recognise there are some weeks where I probably need a little bit more time, and time to think, and time to come to some of the decisions I've got to make need a little bit of thought. You can't do that if you're constantly on the go. And then you just recognise when there's weeks when you just need to kind of be all in, really, and just find the balance. So experience helps you do that as well.
So drawing on your experience, for officers that are coming into policing or are in policing, what advice would you give them to leave those emotional, impactful jobs behind?
First and foremost, one of the things that's dramatically changed in my time is the availability of welfare support to officers and staff. And I encourage all officers and staff to look at that offer and just make sure you really do understand that that offer is there. And whether it's your supervisors, your managers, your leaders, we're all much more alive now to the impact of stress and anxiety in the workplace, and that just wasn't really recognised when I joined. It was just a different era. It wasn't recognised in the way it is now. So my advice to any officer joining is just make sure you try and maintain your own really good healthy balance in life. Make sure you look after yourself and make sure you're thinking about your own well-being. But when you recognise there's periods of stress and strain, make sure you access that help and support. And it can be just as simple as talking to a colleague about how you feel. And, I am a child of the 70s. Talking about how you feel wasn't really a thing when I grew up. It just wasn't. You just got on with stuff. And of course, what we realise now is that's just not a healthy way to deal with your mental health. You need to have the ability to talk to people about the challenges that you face, but recognise that everybody, and I see this particularly in people joining the service now, the resilience is really important. You have to be a resilient individual. If you know you're not a resilient individual, it's probably not the thing to come into policing. You do need to be resilient, but there's an awful lot of help out there for you and an awful lot of support, and I'm really keen to make sure that we give that level of support to officers and staff, because at times it can be a really challenging job. Hugely rewarding, but at times challenging as well.
And I know as a member of Kent Police that one of your pledges is around the health, safety and well-being of your staff, which is one of the things that provides me with comfort, but also me as a leader sharing that with my team just to make sure that they are fit, well and healthy within policing. So we're just going to try and look at what the most defining moment in your career has been.
Well, again, that's a bit of a toughie, really. But 30 years, I suppose, I guess probably quite early on, the pressure of learning so much so quickly, and then coming out of a training environment into being a police, these are difficult times, and I always remember that for our young cops. That's where you really do need a lot of support. But I think probably to answer the question, I think it probably took me maybe a year, maybe 14 or 16 months before I really settled and knew this was the job for me. And it's pretty difficult within that to give you one moment of utter revelation. But once I realised that, young as I was, I could deal with physical confrontation, I could deal with verbal confrontation. When you are a young person going to deal with maybe a couple in their 50s that are having an argument and there might be domestic abuse there, your job is to protect. That can be really challenging if you're in your 20s. They were times where I went to those calls and think, can I actually do this? But once I realised that I could, and I was making the right interventions, and importantly, the more experienced people around me were telling me that was fine, that's a good job, you needed to do that. Or conversely, no, next time you need to do this and not that. I think at that period, that acute learning, it's a really steep learning curve, because you're trying to remember all your training, you're trying to remember all the law, all the procedure, and still make really good sound decisions and be a really good police officer. So I think during that period, Vinny, to kind of answer your question, there were plenty of times where I went to calls and doubted myself. Lots of times where I thought, I'm not sure, am I really the right person for this? But I'm a real believer that once you start doing it, you'll quickly work it out. Is it right for you or not? So I think during that period, probably sort of from being an independent patrol officer at about 9 months through to, I would say maybe 14 or 16 months, I was going to things I'd never been to before. I was dealing with all sorts of things that I would probably never meet in normal everyday life as a police officer. I worked out that, this was for me and I could do it. and that just gave me and would give young officers more and more confidence that you can do this. And of course, for every person joining us, just remember there are thousands of people that have gone before you. So it is not the case that for you as an individual it's impossible to do, because look at the thousands of people that are doing it now and have done it before you. And that gave me great confidence that, of course, if other people can do this, I can do this. And so young people joining us, I would kind of say that first period, that up to sort of 18 months, some people learn much quicker than others, but that first year, 18 months is absolutely critical. And that's the point I think it helps you decide this is for me or not.
From police constable to chief constable, what has been your most challenging moment in your career?
Well, probably personally, there's a few cases that stick in your mind, and that's usually because of the really emotive and difficult challenges of those cases. So a lot of them stick in my mind when people have been really badly hurt through crime, when people have been treated in really deplorable way that has affected their life forever. That is difficult to deal with, and it will leave a mark, and that's why I talk a lot about health and well-being. I suppose interestingly, as the Assistant Chief Constable in charge of the Serious Crime Directorate, which spans us and Essex, I was in charge of the investigation into a large number of Vietnamese individuals who died in the back of a refrigerated lorry that arrived in Essex. And it's a case there was an awful lot of national media about it. We deal with death a lot, but it's not too often we deal with multiple deaths, and particularly the way these poor people had died was really traumatic for the team. I had to support a really large investigation team and a really large response to that. It took us across the globe. I had to go with staff to Vietnam. We had to go and visit 38 families to return their loved ones' property, to talk to them about what we had found and what had happened. So the level of emotion and trauma on the team and on me was really, really high. And I think, interestingly, it was very late in my career that I led that. I had, some sort of late 20 years service, but it still is probably the most traumatic case that I can remember, because I was asking staff to do really, really difficult work in really difficult circumstances, dealing with so much death, dealing with so many traumatised families, so much public outpouring of grief, really, really challenging for the teams. And that took many months to resolve and to deal with, and we had to be very professional through that, and I had to support the staff through that, but of course it also did have an impact on me as an individual.
So moving on now, there's a lot of decisions you have to make as part of the organisation, and how do you balance public safety and trust and confidence in the community?
Well, it's an interesting question, because the two are intrinsically linked. I think that it's absolutely essential that I have that public trust and confidence, otherwise I can't deliver the service. Now, of course, sometimes it means that we have to do things that the public at large might see as unpopular or might see as unnecessary. But I think with each of those occasions, what we must do is explain our actions. Sometimes you can't do that at the time, and that could have an impact on trust and confidence. But as soon as we can, we've got to be really open and transparent with the public. And, I with colleagues have tried to really instill that in our pledge. So I think the public want us to turn up when they call us. Very often it will be the only time in their entire lives they call the police, and often, as you well know, Vinny, that's at their lowest point. It might be at a time in their life where everything's going wrong. They want us to turn up, they want us to be professional, They want us to act with integrity. They want us to be fair in their dealings with us. And they want us to deal with crimes that are reported. They want us to solve those crimes. They want us to keep them updated on how it's going. And all those things are absolutely essential in my view. And they could sound really basic, really, if you think about it. But actually, I do believe that's what the public want from a police service. They want to feel safe. They want to feel secure. And they need to be able to trust us. So everything that we do must be underpinned by that integrity. And then when we make mistakes, I think the public will forgive us. And I say that to officers very often. If they make honest mistakes in the genuine belief they're doing the right thing, but they make a technical error or things just go wrong, they'll have my full support and I will back them. Conversely, officers that go out the way to breach the standards that I expect and the public deserve, we will need to deal with that in a really robust way, and we do.
A brilliant segue into the next question around what do we at Kent Police do to root out unacceptable behaviour?
Well, an awful lot, and rightly so, because one officer who conducts themselves sometimes in a very deplorable way, sometimes in a criminal way, has such a damaging impact on public trust and confidence. I really can't understate that. It's very sad because, of course, the reality is, thankfully, the vast majority of officers and staff behave absolutely impeccably. Brave acts every day to prevent crime and disorder, prevent harm to the public, save people's lives. That can all be undone by one officer behaving in a deplorable fashion. So internally we have an entire department, a professional standards department, whose job is to support staff, of course, first and foremost, and make sure those standards are upheld. But where people fall below those standards, to make sure they investigate that and deal with it. And that means on rare occasions even arresting police officers, because police officers are not above the law. And when they do commit a crime, we arrest them and we deal with them. And I think the public can have real confidence then when they look at us to say, Kent Police will do the right thing when these things occur. They won't, they won't hide it away. They will deal with it. So we have to be open. We have to be transparent. We work really hard with our staff support services and our colleagues to make sure that we do really root out any behaviour, particularly misogyny and particularly behaviour that's really harmful to people. And sometimes that does just require a member of staff to have a little bit of education. They just need to learn, reflect and change their behaviour, and that's great. But if it's more damaging than that, then we need to deal with it and deal with it head on. So the public can be really confident that we are talking about it every day as a senior team. We look at it every day, and there is an entire department whose job is there to check and make sure that everybody in the organisation, me included, behave in the way we should.
And sort of from the supportative element part of it, how do you ensure that the organisation, Kent Police, sort of allow officers to feel valued and confident to be themselves?
Well, it's highly important to me for several reasons, but I guess the two most obvious ones are, the reality is if people come to work and don't feel they can be themselves, they're not going to be as productive. And over time, they potentially could become, really quite down, and it could affect them in a really big way. So if I can't create an organisation where people feel they can bring themselves to work and their whole selves to work and be unashamedly proud of that, then I'm failed right off the bat. Of course, as with lots of organisation, there are rules that we work to, and for public servants, particularly police officers, there are standards we've got to adhere to. But that's all within the gift of anybody coming to work from us, whatever their background, whatever community they come from, or whatever walk of life. Tim Smith actually doesn't really care too much. What I want is really good police officers and really good police staff. And I've been lucky enough to work over 30 years now with some amazing people from all different walks of life. My benchmark has always come back to, are they a great cop? And that should be really my key message to anybody from any community. Do not for a second think you cannot be a police officer, because you can. What will make you a good police officer is these things we've already talked about. What are your values? Are you generally an honest and open person? Are you someone that is selfless? You'll think about other people first, that you enjoy helping other people, that you like protecting other people. If you have these natural instincts and values, you'll be a great cop, regardless of what community or background you have.
And just to affirm some of your work, having transferred from another force to Kent Police, I do feel, certainly from my own perspective, that I can be myself. And that in itself allows me to be able to do more for the organisation and offer my services sort of discretionary effort-wise.
Yeah.
So thank you for allowing that sort of space to be created. Share with us some of the successful initiatives that you've done to sort of strengthen relationship between us and the communities.
Well, I think if you look over many years, we've invested more and more of our time and effort in making sure that particularly we've got the right response to hard to reach communities. And I'm really proud of some of those relationships we've built up with an awful lot of the communities across Kent. Certainly when I was the North Division Commander, the various mosques and the imams. You've got the Sikh temple with thousands of Sikhs attending it every day. And an awful lot of those community groups, I think, just wanted to be listened to. They wanted to have engagement. They wanted to have understanding. And I think very often we would rightly perhaps leave that to our community liaison officers, who are a great group of employees, and it's their full-time job to have that interaction. But actually what I found, particularly as I became more senior officers, they wanted that much higher level of engagement. They wanted to understand what our stance was on certain things. What direction was I giving to officers about stop search? And so certainly the local independent advisory group structure, we spent an awful lot of time to really try and make sure that they had the right representation. And what was made very obvious to me, as you'll know, Vinny, some communities really do want to engage, but I was more interested in the ones that didn't want to engage with us. And so I spent some time, particularly in that role, trying to make sure that we were being quite pushy with those communities to say, please engage with us, we'll do it on your terms. And that was very beneficial, particularly when major incidents happened or major crimes happened, because there was just a bit more trust and confidence between the police and that community. And I think that's something I've instilled in every command that I've had. We've now got, I would suggest, an extremely vibrant independent advisory group, and we now bring in members of the public to look at things such as how we stop search the public and looking at our staff's decisions. We also expose our use of force to the public as well, and we will show our body-worn video to members of the independent advisory group and other members of the public that want to volunteer to do it, and say to them, that's what we did, what do you think? And we explain the context, and the officers will come along and explain what they were facing, why they did what they did. And it's a wonderful mechanism to enable us to really test, is the service we're delivering right? If we've got it right, it's nice to have that affirmation that, you know what, that was okay. But where it's really powerful is where we've got learning, and that learning could be for an individual officer, which is really helpful, but it also could be about our policy and our practice, so we learn as an organisation.
And I guess diversity and inclusion is a real big thing, not just in policing, but in every sort of organisation. How do we promote diversity and inclusion, and what is the importance of it, of having a diverse force?
Well, I think everything we've done over many years now, certainly all the work from my predecessor, I look at and think how powerful that's been to bring in as much diversity as possible. I want to continue that work. Sessions like this, I don't relish spending my time on a podcast, really. I kind of always just want to go back to policing. That's what I like doing. But this is really, really important, because I want anyone from any walk of life, from any community, to listen to me and hear me say those words that I want them to join us. I really do. If they have those values and qualities that I've talked about, I want them here. And there is no doubt in my mind, you only have to look at thousands of studies to see and feel the difference that true diversity inclusion brings. And it's a really simple one for me, and it's about service delivery and performance. If you have diverse workforce and that matches diverse communities, you will get better engagement, you'll get better service delivery, and you'll get better performance for the public. We'll be more effective at protecting the public, we'll be more effective at preventing and detecting crime. All of those things are obvious. And 33 years is a long time, and when I joined, I can tell you, I think from memory, there was one female inspector on the station that I worked. There were extremely few officers from minority ethnic backgrounds. There was one black officer from memory, I think, on one of the sections I was working on. And our representation just clearly wasn't matching the communities we were policing. We've still got an awful long way to go, Vinny, but I reflect now on particularly, I think, female representation in the organisation compared to what it was. It's still got a way to go, and I think minority ethnic communities is getting better and better, but we've still got a long way to go. We have to try and match the diversity of our communities as closely as we can, because that inclusion and that confidence, particularly communities that feel maybe most alienated from the police, is absolutely vital that we have that to try and gain their confidence. Without it, we just cannot police as effectively as we should.
That's so reassuring, being a police officer of colour within Kent Police, and what support you provide within the organisation really sort of shares with the community that what can actually be done when they join the policing family. You've shared with us a bit of your past experiences, you've shared with us some of the things that you're currently doing. Let's look at some future goals, one professional and one personal, that you'd like to share with us.
Well, blimey. I've talked a lot about why I've sort of continued and what keeps me motivated, and I think probably the professional goal will be achieving for me that position where I think I can get the force to be as efficient and as effective as it possibly can, particularly working to the values we hold and making sure that our response to everything that we are called to, whether that is a very, very minor disturbance between two neighbours over parking, or whether it is the most awful murder in our community, that our response is absolutely the best it can be. It's delivered with absolute integrity, and it's one that the public can be really proud of, and that the public can trust us, that when they call, we will turn up and will respond in the way that we should. And I know I'll never be able to stop all crime. I don't think that's actually possible. But I'm determined. I want to drive down crime as far as I possibly can and really make Kent the very, very safest place for people to work, live and visit day in and day out. That's what I really aspire to. If I can get there before my time's up, I should be really, really pleased. And there are some short-term things that I need to address that I've touched on to achieve that, around our budget and the structure of the force and how we're equipped, and how I align our resources to demand. All of those come into that sort of goal, if you like, Vinny. Personally, it'll probably be to try and survive all that and live a long and healthy retirement. But personally, I've got adult children now. I have a little bit more time to myself, and maybe I can, with my wife, do a bit of travel and get a bit of time back for ourselves.
So you talked about your uncle sort of planting the seed around being coming into the sort of police service. And you've done 30 plus years. looking back, what advice would you give your younger self starting into policing?
That's a difficult one. Blimey. I suppose it's a good question. I would. So I think probably the young Tim Smith had an awful lot of energy, and I was really committed. But I think probably at times apparently I can be a bit stubborn. So I think there's probably times where I could have learnt a little bit quicker. I could have probably stopped and reflected a bit more. I think we're far more enlightened now about being reflective and stopping as people and as an organisation to say, do you know what, really, how did that go, and could I have learnt better from it? And I probably wasn't as good at that as a youngster, and it means that the reality is you just don't learn as quickly. So I was probably holding myself back from not being as reflective as I should, not spending the time to acknowledge when things went wrong and work out, well, what went wrong, what can I do better in the future. And I do see that in new cops, because I think there's a real, I was talking about expectation changing. I do see a lot of my young colleagues putting that pressure on themselves that, they think they've always got to be perfect on day one, and then when they're perhaps not perfect on day one, it really does affect them. And I think having the permission to get things wrong is really important, as long as you learn from it. So I think probably that's the key bit of advice I would give, is a little stopping when you know something has happened and maybe it hasn't gone the way you wanted it to go. That's the time to stop, talk to others about it, make sure you really identify what went wrong, what you can fix for next time, because you just become so much more effective, so much quicker, and your confidence grows with that. Why wouldn't you do it? But I think as a young man, I just didn't do it. I just ploughed on and ploughed on. It probably took me a lot longer to become a really effective cop than actually it should have taken me.
And those that will be listening who have sort of listened to all of your experiences and they're now on the sort of cusp of thinking about joining, what advice would you give those that are thinking about joining policing and Kent Police?
Well, I think probably first and foremost, I think be very honest with yourselves about, is this the job for you? And it's really difficult to make that assessment until you actually do the job. And that was something that really struck me. So I would come back to probably two or three things. The motivation. What is your motivation for wanting to do this? If the motivation is an honest one, I think you've got a good chance. If the motivation isn't perhaps an honest one, then I think you would naturally struggle. What values and qualities have you got as a person? It's just so vital in policing. It does not mean we all have to be exactly the same, far from it. It does not mean that every single quality and value must be matched in every single officer, but you fundamentally have to be of an honest disposition. You have to have integrity. You have to have some values to know what's right and what's wrong. You have to be able to accept some authority and be told what to do, and that isn't always for everybody. But at your heart, you have to be someone that wants to help other people. And if you feel a sense of injustice when things happen that shouldn't happen, like crime, that's a good benchmark, I think, to tell you that you've probably got the right sort of value system where you could make a real difference. And whether it's physical courageousness, morally courageous people, there are some values that will add a lot. But if your motivation and your values are true, you can absolutely fly in this job. And what people have to remember is that there are hundreds and hundreds of different jobs within one employer. And some people join us and they desperately want to be a dog handler, and great, that's fine, because we need really good dog handlers. But they'll find that they actually suddenly like doing lots of traffic work, or they really like investigations, or they want to be a surveillance officer. All of that is available to you once you are a police officer. And so actually, if those values are there, go for it. You never quite know where it takes you. You can have a bit of a plan, but just see how it goes. Because once you start, you will experience all the different facets of policing. And that's exactly what I did. I was a patrol officer. I loved being a patrol officer, didn't want to do anything else. And it was a very sensible and bright sergeant who realised that actually I could probably be quite a good investigator. And they pushed me into the investigation teams, and I didn't want to go. And talking about reflection and learning, I kicked and screamed, and I really didn't want to go because I loved doing patrol work. But once I got there and I had talked to myself, come on, Tim, yeah, this is a job, do it. You've been asked to do a job, get on with it. Within a few months, I became more and more confident of what I was doing, and actually I started to realise if I could do really, really good investigations, I could really impact positively on people's lives. And I just loved it, and I got better and better at it. So it took me in a direction I never really anticipated. You couldn't have told me that before I joined. So to anyone with those values, if you are even thinking about it, give it a go, because it can take you to places that personally and professionally you just get such massive rewards from it. It's a truly wonderful job.
And I'd wholeheartedly agree. I think I've always seen policing as a career within a career, and it just, when people see the opportunities that are available when you come into policing, I think you just get enhanced and get absorbed into the whole family of it. Well, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook and LinkedIn, where we will be posting previews of our upcoming episodes. You can watch this episode by subscribing to our YouTube channel and find out more about the variety of opportunities available by searching Kent Police Careers. See you soon.